Hey, and welcome back to another video. And in this video, we're going to look at how to build an onboarding screen in SwiftUI. We're going to build a basic onboarding screen first and then slowly build on top of it with features such as sign up and also accepting terms conditions, as well as handling state restoration so our user can continue from where they left off if they close the app. We're going to be building the sign up for a fake social media app. So first of all, let's actually just build a login screen that we'll use to simulate our users logging in. Now, it's worth noting that the first part of this tutorial, I'm just going to simulate you logging in and logging out, but it's not actually going to use a real API. So let's just do this quickly now. So let's create two new views, and the first thing we'll do is rename our content view to home view and update our previews. So rather than this being content view, we're just going to rename this to home view. And then we're also going to need to update our SwiftUI preview as well. And then within our home view, I'm just going to add some UI. So we just got a VStack with some text and a button in it. And this button is what we're going to use to handle simulating a sign out. And let's actually create a new file called login view. And we'll add in some UI in here and then break that down as well. So now we've got our login view in here. It's just a Z-stack and it's got a background color of blue. And we've also got a V-stack where we just lay out our UI components. So we've got some information here within a V-stack. We've also got a text field for the username, a secure field for the password, and a login button so that someone can tap this to log in to our app. So, simulate a login like I said before. So now let's actually create our source of truth for actually handling switching between our logged in and our signed out views. So we're going to create a new file called session manager. And then within the session manager, we're just going to do some typing out and then as usual, break it down. So this session manager is going to be our source of truth. It's an observable object, and what we're going to do to listen to the current state that the user is in is we're going to use an enum which tells us whether the user is logged in or logged out. And we've just got a published property here which is private set, so you can't modify it from outside. You can only read changes to it, but you can still change it within this scope. And this current state is what we'll listen to for the changes within our app. And then we simply just have two functions here to sign in, which will change the state, and sign out, which will also change the state as well. Now let's actually use this in our main app and inject it into our views using the environment object. So if we go into our main app entry point, we're going to create an instance of that session manager in here. And then what we want to do is within our main app entry point, we also want to listen to the changes within our session and actually switch between the views that the user sees on the screen. So let's use a switch statement to do that now. So what we're saying here is we're just simply saying that depending on the state, if the current state is logged in, then we want to show the home view, or else by default we just want to show the login view. And we've added in the transition modifier to transition our views off the screen using an opacity. So what we want to do now is actually pass this session into both of these two views here, and we can do that by using the environment object modifier. So on our home view, let's just add this in. And then we'll also do on our login view. Now within our home view and our login view, we actually need to use the environment object property wrapper within both of these views. So let's go into both of these views now. And then we're just going to use the environment object property wrapper. And then one thing to note, like I said before in my previous video, when you're working with environment objects, is as soon as you add this property wrapper, you always want to add it to your SwiftUI preview so you make sure that your previews don't crash. So let's do that now. And then we want to copy the exact same thing that we did here for our login view. So let's just do that now. So now both of our views in our app have access to the session manager and are actually able to call those functions sign in and sign out. So now within these views, let's actually call those functions. In our home view, within our sign out function, we're just going to call the sign out function within the with animation block. So now what this should do is actually animate the view going off the screen and changing to the logged in view. And then within our login view, we just want to go and find our login button, and then we want to do another with animation block, but this time we want to call the sign in, because we want to sign in the user and animate changes to the logged in view, which is our home view. So because we've actually got this within our main app entry point, we're not actually able to run this on the canvas. So we need to test this out. So let's just run this and see if it works. And I'm just going to put the simulator side by side here. So as you can see, we've now got our login view within our application. And if we actually tap on login, so I've not actually done any validation on this. So if you just tap on this button, it will just simulate you logging in. So if you tap on login, it actually does change to our logged in view. But if you also tap on sign out, you'll see that it also changes back to our logged out view. But one thing to note is that there's actually no animation here. And why is this? Well, in your main app entry point, you're actually not able to handle animations and transitions within the window group. So in order to fix this, and so we can actually see our transition and animation that we specified with our opacity, what we need to do is actually place our main app content, so this content here, within a SwiftUI view so it can perform those animations. So what we're going to do is create a new file called main app view. And then within this main app view, we're just going to copy all of the stuff that we added within our main app entry point. So we're going to copy this state object and we're going to move this into our main app view like so. And then we don't need to copy the window group, but what we do need to do is copy our switch statement. So let's just take this switch statement here, cut that, and then we're going to paste that in here in the body. And then within our main app entry point in here, what we're going to do is use our main app view instead. Cool. So let's actually just test this out again and see what happens. So I'm just going to disable the canvas for this example now. So if we run this again, this time when we tap on login, you'll see that we actually get that transition animation for us, and when you tap sign out, it works. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're working with animations and you want to animate stuff that's at the root of your application. What I tend to do is actually wrap the whole view within a SwiftUI view, because you're not able to perform animations in the main app entry point at the time of this video. So now we've got our login and our sign out view sorted. The next thing we want to do is actually start looking at how we can build our actual onboarding view. So let's create a new file called onboarding view. So in order to actually build our onboarding view, what we're going to use is a tab view. So let's just add this in now with our base template, and then we'll break it down. So in our onboarding view, I'm just going to stop this from running now and just remove the simulator so we can see the canvas again. Okay, cool. And then I'm just going to type out some base code and then we'll break it down. So we've got ourselves a Z-stack in our onboarding view, and we've just set a background within our Z-stack of this color blue, as you can see here. Now, when you're working with tab views, I have showed you this in previous videos before, that you normally have two, tab items at the bottom. You can actually navigate between those two screens. But tab view actually also has another functionality, which is this, where you're actually able to change the tab view style to page. And what it allows you to do is almost get like a scrollable page where you can actually scroll through content, as you can see here. So what we've said here is we want to set the tab view style to page, which gives us this capability here. And then we've also got this other modifier below it called the index view page style. So what this is for this bottom part here. So we're saying here that we want the page, we want the index view style for the page that you're scrolling through to look like this. So page.background display mode, and we're saying that we want it to always show this material page indicator at the bottom to indicate what page that a user is on. So with just a few lines, you could actually very easily create your own onboarding view, and TabView has amazing functionality that allows you to build stuff like this really easily. So now that we have our onboarding screen, as you can see, we're able to swipe through the screens like I was doing before. We need to actually build 3 screens that will actually feature within our onboarding. So we'll actually build the first one now and then look at the other 2. So let's create a new view called Onboarding Info View, and this view is going to help us hold the information that we want to show within our onboarding flow. So let's do that now. Okay, cool. So this onboarding info view is what we're going to use as the template within our onboarding flow. So all the onboarding screens are going to have this exact same layout, which is why I've broken it up into its own separate view so we can reuse this easily. So we've just simply got a VStack with some text in it, and we've just got some dummy text here, which is why it's got the lorem ipsum, and we said we want the text to be in the middle of the screen. The foreground color of the text should be white, and we just added some padding around it. Now, if you're not sure about how the preview looks like this is because I've actually specified on my preview, I want the layout of it to be size that fits. So what this means is it's going to remove that device example. So it's not going to have this, if I just go back to our onboarding view, it's not going to have this device around it. Instead, it's just going to wrap around the content on our view, and then I've just simply set the background to blue so we can see the white text a lot easier. Now what we want to do is actually add this into our tab view. So rather than us having our text view, let's just remove this and use our onboarding info view instead. So now we've got our onboarding info view within our tab view, and you can see that it's looking good. Now you're not able to see the page indicator at the bottom here anymore because we only have one view within our tab view. But if I was to duplicate this and add another one in, you should see that it now appears because we now have two pages within the tab view. So let's actually just run this on our preview and just see how it looks when we scroll between. And I think that that looks good. So this looks great. And if you wanted to, you could actually just keep on going here and just keep adding in different onboarding info views like so. So we could just go crazy and just add in like 4 if we wanted to. And this would work fine, and each one would have their own information. But in my opinion, I think that we have a bit of a problem. So it's actually possible for us to get into a situation where our tab view may get a bit unmaintainable, or on top of that as well, if we had the layout issues within each one of these views, we'd have to actually manually go into the view and change it for each individual view and whatnot. Now, I don't really want to have to do that. Instead, what I would prefer if I had some kind of array where I could just modify some text within it, and the tab view will kind of just handle the layout and, you know, positioning stuff by itself. So all we need to do to change and update content is just modify our array. So how can we do this? Well, what about if we just had these screens just generate from some kind of source of truth? Well, we can do this by creating a new file called Onboardingmanager. And what we'll do is we'll get this onboarding view to actually read from this source of truth and create onboarding info views from this array. So let's do that now. So let's create a new file called Onboardingmanager. So it could be a new Swift file. And then within this onboarding Swift file, what I want to do is create an immutable struct where you just specify the emoji, title, and content. So let's actually just type this out and then we'll break it down. We've got ourselves here an immutable struct, and the reason why this is immutable is because I just want to set the values once, and we don't really need to watch these properties really change. It's just to display static content on the screen. Now we've marked this as identifiable because we're actually going to loop through an array of these onboarding items within our onboarding screens, so we need something to uniquely identify them. So in order to uniquely identify them, I've created this property here called ID, which is a constant. Now, within this file, what we now want to do is actually write our class for holding these onboarding items. So I'm going to do that now and then we'll break it down. So we've got our class here called Onboardingmanager, and what this is going to do is it's going to hold our items that we show on the onboarding screen. So this has been marked using observable objects so we can listen to the changes that happen to the items within our onboarding manager. Now we've got a publish property here, which is what we're going to use to hold the items that our view should listen to. And we've also marked this as private set because we don't need any of the views from outside of this class to modify this array of items. We only want them to read from it, and that's it. And then finally, we have a load function here, which just simply sets the items to an array of the content that we want to show in our onboarding manager. So in the future, if you want to change the text within your onboarding, you just simply update this array here and it will be reflected within the app. And we'll do an example of this at some point when we actually build the entire view so you can see how you can update stuff. Okay, sweet. So we want to actually use this onboarding manager within our onboarding view. So let's create an instance of it now. So we just go into our onboarding view. At the top here, we want to create an instance of that source of truth that we just created. Okay, cool. So We've now used a state object and we've marked it private because we want to close it off from any other view, and we just want this to be used as a source of truth for this file. So what we want to do now is actually update our tab view content to check to see if there's items within the manager to show our tab view and create these views within a for each. So let's do that now. So within our Z stack here, what we're going to do is just wrap our tab view in an if statement. And we're going to say if manager the items is not empty. So that means if there's items within the manager, then we want to show our tab view on the screen like so. And then within our tab view, rather than us having to specify each individual onboarding info view, instead what we're just going to do is just create an for each. And then we're going to say that it's going to be based on the manager.items, and then this is going to give us back an item. And then what we want to do here is we actually want to pass an item into item in. And then what we want to do here is we want to actually pass in that item to our onboarding info view. Now right now our onboarding info view doesn't actually take in any kind of item, so let's actually update that now. So if we go into our onboarding info view now, within this struct we want to create a new constant called item, and then what this is going to allow us to do is just pass in the onboarding item from our for each into this view and just set some values. Now you'll get an error in your SwiftUI preview, which is fine, and in order to fix this we're just going to initialize it with some content that we actually have here in the screen already. So I'm just going to copy this for our text emoji here, paste that in there, and then for our title we're just going to paste this in, and then we'll do the same for our content. Cool. So now we want to use the properties within our item to build up our text. So in our first one here we're going to say item.emoji, and then our second one will be item.title, and then our last one will be item.content. Cool. So now if we go back to our onboarding view, we should get an error saying that we're missing the item. Cool. So now we need to fix this and pass in our item like so. And if you actually just resume this on the SwiftUI preview, you'll notice that you won't see anything and it's empty. Now the reason why this is happening is because we need to actually call the load function on our view when it appears. So we don't want to call it on the tab view because this is wrapped in a condition, so it might not ever show this tab view. So instead we want to call the load function on our actual Z stack. So let's do that now. So we're going to say on our Z stack on appear perform manager.load, and now you can see your onboarding items in the onboarding view, and if we scroll through you'll now see that you're seeing the content that we defined within our array. Now I mentioned before that I was going to show you an example of how this can update. So what we're actually going to do now is just add in another item into our onboarding manager array, so you can just see how it updates based on this content here. So let's just copy this, and then we're going to just paste that below, and then we're going to choose a new emoji, and I think I'm going to just choose the dancing man, and we're just going to say dance with the team. Okay, cool. And now if we just resume this, you'll see that our SwiftUI preview, this isn't a last screen no more, and our preview updates with our array based on our array. So now we're able to dynamically change the content within our onboarding view based off this array. And if I was to just comment like these three out, so let's just comment them out, and then if we just run this again, you'll now see because we only have one item in this array, we actually don't get the page view style because we've actually commented out the other 3 items. So now we can easily dynamically change our onboarding view based off this onboarding manager class that we have here. Now it's also worth noting that I actually do have another tutorial where I actually build an onboarding screen similar to this, but this time rather than it being based off an array, I actually build it based off a plist. So if you want to check that out, you should check out my other video, building an onboarding screen in SwiftUI, which I'll leave a link to as well in the cards bit. So before we actually just wrap up on this onboarding view, there is one final thing that I do want to do, and that one final thing is actually add in a button when we scroll to the last screen in our onboarding view. So now let's actually add in some logic for when the user views the last item, and we'll toggle the visibility of this button so it's always on the screen. So what I want to do is actually create a new source of truth within our view and not this onboarding manager. Let's just go back to our onboarding view, and then within here I'm going to create a new source of truth called show button. And you may be wondering why I did not put this within the content manager, and the main reason why I didn't is because the manager is specific for loading content on the screen, not controlling the button, and we just want to show the button on the screen. Now this is something that is specific to this view, so we can actually add it in as a state property to the view since it only applies to this screen and it isn't related to building the other content that you saw before on it. And we'll actually add in some logic for toggling the button on the screen now. So what we want to do is within our onboarding info view, we want to check to see if someone has reached the last screen and set this to true. So on our onboarding info view here, we're just going to use the onAppear modifier, and we're going to type out some logic to say if. So we're just saying here that if the item matches the last item within the manager array of items, then we want to add in a animation and where we toggle the show button is equal to true. So we're explicitly saying that we want to set the show button to true and we don't want to use a toggle functionality. Now we're going to get an error here, and the reason why is because our model is actually not conforming to equatable, so we're not able to do that comparison. So in order to fix that, let's just do that now. We'll just say extension onboarded item, and we'll make it conform to equatable like so. And then now when we build that, you should see that our error goes away because it's able to actually do that direct comparison. Now the next thing we need to do is actually add in our button, and we're going to actually overlay this button underneath this onboarding info view. So after the onAppear, we're going to add in another modifier called overlay, and we're going to align it to the bottom first. So we're going to say overlay, and we're going to say the alignment is on the bottom. So now this will position our view on the bottom of this view here. And then I'm just going to say here that if show button. So if we do want to show the button, so if this is true, then we're going to add this view onto the screen, which is our button. And I'm just going to type this out and then we'll break it down. So we just got a button here, and you're not going to see that because we're not on the last screen, but this button's just got some styles on it and a background. Now one thing you will see is 2 things on the end. So the first thing that we have is the offset. So this 50 here isn't actually a magic number. So what we're saying is that because the button is 50 pixels tall and it's going to position it 50 pixels from the bottom, we're actually going to push the button down based on its height. So it's going to push it down by 50 pixels so that it's underneath this onboarding info view. And then finally what we say here is we want to use a transition where we actually scale the button into the view and combine it with an opacity. So at the time of this recording, if I actually scroll through, you'll see that our button now animates onto the screen fine, but it's actually animating it on the 3rd item and not the last item. Well, the problem here is that with TabView, there's actually an issue at the time of this recording where the onAppear for views within it get triggered when they're not even on the screen. Now, this hasn't been resolved yet by Apple, but I'm hoping that it's something that gets resolved by WWDC. So in order to get around this, what we're going to need to do is actually reduce the number of views within our onboarding info view. So that's if you want to do this type of animation where you check to see the last item and then animate this onto the screen. Now, if we just go into our onboarding manager and we just remove this last one and then we rerun it, you'll now see that when it loads, that when we actually scroll to the last one, it actually animates it fine. Now, if you're someone who used to have more than one onboarding item within your onboarding views, then there actually is a solution that I found online within the Apple developer forums, and this is a GIST here, which allows someone to add in a on did appear. So this basically checks to make sure that your view is definitely on the screen before it triggers the on view appear. But I'm not going to add this in now. But if you're someone who does want to do that, then you probably want to check out this, and I'll leave a link to it in the description box below. So now that we can see this working and our continue button is on the screen and it animates in nicely, what we want to do is actually add this into our onboarding flow within our app. So in order to do this, we're going to use user defaults, and I actually have a video on this called user defaults and AppStorage in SwiftUI that you should check out to learn more about user defaults. But for this example, we're just going to look at this using just user defaults and not AppStorage. So in our session manager, we're going to actually add in a new case to our screens called onboarding. So let's go into our session manager, and we're going to add a new case called onboarding. And then within this new case, what we're going to need to do is actually figure and calculate if someone has actually seen this onboarding. So what do I actually mean by that? Well, we only want to show this onboarding screen if the user has actually hit the complete button at the end. So if they've tapped on this button, then we can assume that they've finished the onboarding flow and it's all done. In our session manager, let's actually add in a new function called configure state that will check to see if the user has finished their onboarding. So we're going to just add this in below here. And also what we need to do is when you're working with user defaults, you need to define keys. Now we could just do a string here where we just, type the string directly in user defaults functions, but it's very easy for you to actually mess up the key name. So to make this more type safe, what we're just going to add in is a enum with static properties so we can access these keys without, butchering any spelling. So let's just add this in here. So this is our first key that we're going to use for managing if the user has seen the onboarding. So let's actually access and use this key within our configure current state function. So what we're saying here is that we're going to get the key value. So get the key has seen onboarding and then access the bool value and then store it in this constant. And we're just simply checking to see if the current state of the onboarding has been completed. Then we're going to show the logged out, or else we're going to show the current state onboarding. So if we actually wanted to, we could actually shorten this by using a ternary operator. So let's actually just do that now. So now we've actually reduced that, and we've just done that on one line. Cool. Now let's actually use this in our main app and call this function to tell our app to show the onboarding screen when the user hasn't finished the onboarding flow. So we go into our main app view like here, like so. What we want to do within here is we want to actually add our switch statement within a Z stack so we can call that function. So let's do that now. So on our Z stack, we want to say on appear, we want to perform this configure current state. Now, because we've added in our onboarding, we need to actually update our switch statement here to now take into account the onboarding view we just added. And we also want to apply a transition onto it as well. What I'm going to do is actually be a bit more specific here. So we're going to say if it's logged in, then we want to show the home view. But we're going to say if the case is logged out, then we want to show this view here, which is a log in view. So logged out. And then we want to add another case in here for onboarding. So we're going to say onboarding. Then we want to show the onboarding view that we just created before. And then, so with our onboarding view, we're not actually going to add in the environment object. We're going to handle this a different way, which we'll get to in a second. But what we do want to do is specify a transition, and we want the transition to be an asymmetric transition. What that means is that when it gets added onto the screen, it's going to have a transition on insertion, and on removal, it'll have a different transition. So depending on how it's added or removed, it will look different. So we're going to say asymmetric. And then for the insertion, so when this gets added onto the screen, we want to add in an opacity transition. But on the removal, we want to actually add in a moving ledge. So we want to actually move this from the left-hand side. We want to almost like swipe from this side in. Cool. And then because our switch is not exhaustive, what we're going to do on our default is to show a splash screen. So our splash screen is just going to be the color blue. Now this could be any kind of splash screen that you want to add here, but I'm just adding this in if we ever needed to do some kind of operation and wait for it to finish before we change the current state of our session. So now let's actually go back to our test app project, and rather than hard coding it to always be the onboarding view, we're just going to change this back to main app view so we can actually see this in action. And let's just run this on our simulator. So now when you run the app for the first time, you'll see your onboarding screen because that key is user defaults within our session manager is actually set to false because we've not actually set it anywhere. So because it's false, it will actually always show us the onboarding screen here, like you can see in the Ternary Operator. So if we actually just keep scrolling through, we can see all our content and we actually get our animation in as well. But the thing that we don't have now is that when someone actually taps on continue, nothing's actually happening. But what we do want to happen is that we actually want to remove this screen and actually take the user to the login view. So how do we do that? Well, what we want to do is on our onboarding view, we actually want to add in a closure to tell any views that use it that someone has tapped on this button. Now you may be wondering, why am I not using the environment object like I did before? Well, for this case, I don't want the onboarding view to know about the session. I kind of just want this to be a view that you can just plop in anywhere, and when you tap on continue, it just tells you that someone's tapped on this button, which is why I'm not inserting the environment object. Let's go into our onboarding view, and we're going to add in our closure to communicate to our views that this button has been tapped. And if you want to learn more about closures, then you should check out my video how to communicate between different views using closures and at escaping in SwiftUI. So let's do that now. So we just create an action, void. Now because we've added this in, we should get an error. So we just build this. We'll get an error on our preview because it expects us to use that closure. So let's actually use that now. And then finally, what we need to do is actually call this closure action within our button. So we go on action here like so. This will actually call the closure. And then finally, within our main app view, you now see that it's telling us that we need to actually use that closure. So within here, we'll use the closure like so. So now what this will do is it will actually communicate when someone's tapped the continue button. So we need to create a new function within our onboarding view to actually change the current state of our session to be logged out. But before we do that, I actually want to do a tiny bit of refactoring, because one thing that I've realized is that I'm having to type out the with animation block every time that I want to animate a change between views. So rather than us doing that, how about if we actually just use the animation modifier and just listen to changes from our current state so that any views that we have in here in the future automatically get updated with their transitions when that state changes. So in order to do that, let's just go into our home view first, and then this animation block, we're going to take it out and just leave it like so. And then we're also going to go into our login view and take that out as well at the bottom in our button. So now, when we go back into our main app view, above our on appear here, we actually just want to add in the animation modifier to listen to changes to the session's current state, and it will actually animate changes based on this property. So let's do that now. So we're going to say dot animation, and then we just want it to be an easing out, and then we want the values for it to be observing changes for is the session.current state. Because all of our views are within this switch statement, which are affected directly by this current state, as long as we add in the transition modifier, it will automatically animate and perform the transitions on these views. So within our onboarding view, let's actually create a new function within our session manager called complete onboarding. So we just go here, and if we create a new function underneath sign out called complete onboarding, cool. So this function is just simply going to set the current state to be logged out, so it shows our logged out view with the username, password, and login button. So let's call this function within our onboarding view. What I've just done is on our onboarding view, I've actually created an inline function where I actually call it directly without the closure. And then what's going to happen now is that when that closure gets triggered, it's going to call this function and take us to our login screen. So let's actually see this in action. So if we run this, we scroll through, we now see our continue button. If we tap on this, it now takes us to our login screen like so. Okay, cool. So one thing that I saw is that when I did the leading animation, I wasn't a massive fan of that. So instead of doing this asymmetric animation, instead, what I'm going to do is just change this to be an opacity. And if you actually just run this again, you should notice something. So you should see that we're actually seeing our onboarding view again. And it doesn't actually seem to be taking away the onboarding view. And the reason why that is because when we actually call the function complete onboarding, all we did is just change the current state to be logged out. We didn't actually set in user defaults that the key for this, the value for this key should now be true because you now have seen the onboarding. So after we set the logged out state, what we want to do is say user defaults dot standard dot set, and then we want to set the boolean true for this key has seen onboarding. So let's actually just run this again now. And when we scroll through, we see our button. If we tap on our button, we now see our login view, and we can log in and we can sign out. So this works all fine. We've actually run this again this time. You'll see that we don't see our onboarding screen, and that's because when we call the complete onboarding, we actually set the key in user defaults for this to be true, meaning that because this is true, it now shows our logged out view. Now, if you're someone who wants something like this, like an onboarding view within your app, that's just simple like this, then pretty much this is all good. But what I want to do now is I actually want to add in another flow after the onboarding to allow users to actually sign up within the application, like a sign up flow. So what we're going to do is actually add in the ability for a user to enter their username that they want, their age, and a short bio about themselves. So what we're going to do now is actually add in 3 separate views within a tab view, similar to what we did with our onboarding flow, but this time they're going to be 3 independent views because we need to gather 3 different types of data. So the first view that we're going to actually be building is our username view. So let's just do that now. So let's create a new SwiftUI view called username view. And then within this username view, I'm just going to add in some UI and then we'll break it down. So just so we can see this a bit better, I'm actually going to stop this running on the simulator. And then if we just go back to our username view and we just open up the SwiftUI canvas. Cool. So as you can see here, we're just doing a similar technique where we just show the view as the size that fits. And all I've got here is just some text. We've got a text field here. Right now it's not actually bound to something, but it will be in a second. And then we've just got a button to go to the next part of our onboarding flow. So one thing that you'll start to notice here, and this is a challenge that I want to set for you, is that I'm actually repeating myself here with the text fields on the on the login screen and also the button styles within the app. So I actually have a video called text field in SwiftUI and buttons in SwiftUI where I actually show you how to create a text field with text field styles and a button with button styles. So what I want to do is I want to challenge you to actually refactor this code to actually use a button style and a text field style so that we avoid this repetition. And if you manage to figure out, then leave a comment in the comment section below and also show me your progress on Twitter as well. So let's create a new view called age view, and we'll actually just copy this view that we created here but just tweak it slightly. As you can see, it's not too much different from our other view, except this time, instead of us having a text field, we now just have a slider on the screen. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually change the step here to increment by 1 because we don't want to allow someone to go into like 18.1 and 18.2. Okay, cool. And then the final view that we want to create within our app here is our bio view, which is going to be similar to our username view, except this time it's going to use a text editor. So we've got our bio view on the screen here, and it's just a text editor. And this time the button here has register because this is going to be the last screen within our sign up flow. So now that we have all of our views, let's actually add them within a tab view. So let's create a new file called sign up view, and then we're going to add a tab view onto the screen. you just simply got a Z stack, similar to what we had before, and we got the background color, and then now we actually have a tab view within our Z stack. So one thing you'll notice with our tab view this time is that we're actually saying that we don't want to display the page indicator at the bottom, and we've actually set that we want the index display mode to be never. But if you wanted to, you're actually still able to actually swipe through this views. Now, this is something that we're going to disable because when we want someone to register within this application, we don't want them to be able to like just bypass all this and go straight to the bio. We want to actually handle the navigation between these screens programmatically, which is what we're going to look into. So in order to actually handle that, we need to create a source of truth for this sign up view. And we're going to create a new file called registration manager. So let's do that now. The whole purpose of this class is to just simply handle any kind of business logic related to the registration screen. So within it, we also have an enum called screen, and this is just the screens within the registration flow. Now, I've said that I want this to be of type int because these are the order of the screens within our registration flow. So the first one is going to be username, followed by age, and then followed by bio, which is why the bio screen had that register button at the end. Now, we actually want to have the ability to just easily scroll through all the screens. Now, I don't want to have to create an array myself with all of these enum cases. Instead of us doing this, we can just use the case iterable protocol to get this functionality for free. So let's add this in. And now that we've got this case iterable, we're able to just access an array of all these enum cases for free. Now, the next thing we need to do is give our registration manager some kind of source of truth to tell us which screen the user is currently on when they're filling out the registration form. So let's create a new published property that we can actually observe changes to. So this property here, active, is going to tell us that the user is on the first screen. So we're just getting all the cases via our case iterable protocol here, and we're just accessing the first case within this enum array. And now whenever we switch between the screens, we'll just set which one is currently active. So in order to do that, we need to create two new functions called next and previous. So let's do that now. So let's just break these down. So in our next function, we're just getting the current active screen's raw value. Since it's an integer, we can access the int value, and we're adding 1. And then we're also getting the last enum case within this screen and checking its raw value, and whichever one is the minimum, that's the one that we're going to use to access this screen. So the reason why we're using this minimum is because we don't want someone to go out of the index range. So let's say, for example, if we did active here and you was on 0, 1, 2, let's say you're on the last screen here, what will happen here is we'll actually do 2 plus 1, which is 3, and this would actually be 2. So this function would return 2 because that is the minimum between 2 and 3. So on the previous, do the inverse. Rather than checking the minimum, we actually check the max, so we don't go below 0. So this just ensures that we don't go past username like so. So based on these two functions, we're now able to actually scroll through our enum cases, our screen enum cases, and make sure that we show the correct screen when someone taps next or previous on our sign up flow. So just to see this in action, what we're going to do is we're going to actually add in some closures within our views. So let's go into our username view, and we're going to add in a closure to actually communicate when someone taps on this button. So at the top here, let's just create a new action like so. And then we're going to call this action within our button. And we should get an error in our SwiftUI preview. So we're just going to do that to fix the error. And then we want to just repeat this for our age view and our bio view. Okay, cool. So now within our sign up view, we should get some errors saying that we've not implemented the action parameter, which is our closure. So on our bio view, we don't actually want to do anything just yet when someone actually taps on that button. So we're just going to leave this as an empty closure. But on our username view, we're going to call the action parameter and just use the manager.next. We're going to use the manager.next function within this signup view. So in this signup view, let's create an instance of our source of truth. And then we're going to call that function that we created before called manager within our action. Cool. And we're going to repeat the same thing for our age view. Cool. Sweet. So what we're saying here is that when someone actually taps on the next button within the onboarding flow, we're going to just push to the next screen. So we actually just tap on this next button, you'll notice that nothing is happening. And the reason why nothing is happening is because as of right now, our tab view does not know what the username view screen is, what the age view screen is, and what the bio view screen is, so we can scroll to them programmatically. So in order to fix this, what we need to actually do is actually give each one of our views a unique tag identifier and also bind the selection of the active screen to our tab view. So on your tab view, if you just create an instance of it like so with the parentheses, and then if we just type out selection, and then within here, we want to actually bind this to the active screen within the manager like so. And then on each one of these views, we need to give them a tag so that our tab view can be notified of what the tag is for this view, this view, this view. And whenever this active matches that tag, it will actually automatically scroll to this screen for us. So on our username, we want to add in the tag. So now our views are tagged and our tab view can monitor what screen should actually be scrolled to when the active changes via our next function. So let's just test this out and see what happens. So you can see it works, but we don't actually have a nice animation. And the reason why that is because we've not added in an animation within our actions here when someone actually taps the button and we call manager.next. Now, like I said before, I don't want to have to call the with animation block every single time. So instead of me doing this, I'm just going to call the animation modifier and tell it to animate any changes that happen to the manager.active property. So let's do that now. So let's just retest that out. And if we hit next this time, you'll see that we get the sliding animation. Like I said before, we still got some functionality that we don't want someone to be able to do, and that is this. So I can actually just bypass age and username and just swipe in between the screens. We actually don't want someone to have this capability. So how can we disable this swipe on the tab view? Time of this recording, there's actually not a way to do this in SwiftUI. So what you need to do is actually use a bit of UI kit. So in order to resolve this, what we're going to say is that when the view, so when this sign up view enters the screen, we're going to disable the scrolling functionality on a scroll view, and when it leaves the screen, we're going to re-enable the scrolling on any views that subclass UI scroll view. So you might not realize it, but tab view actually is part of UI scroll view in UI kit, so we can actually manipulate it via this. So on our Z stack, we're just going to add this in, and I'll break it down. Cool. So what we're saying here is that on our Z stack on appear, we're going to get the scroll view appearance, and we're going to set the is scroll enabled to false. And then on disappear of this sign up view, we're going to re-enable the scroll enabled. Now, when you're doing this, it's super important that you make sure that you call this on disappear, because if you don't, what will happen is that your app will not be able to scroll on any views that use UI scroll view as its like base view. So this just kind of like turns it off and on again. So make sure that you add both of these in when you're doing this technique. So let's actually just see if we can actually, scroll it. And as you can see, when I'm running it, I'm not able to scroll it anymore, but I can go to a previous screen by hitting the next button. So we can't actually just bypass and, just do it whatever we want within our sign up flow. So one thing I have noticed is that I've actually gone to the bio screen now, but what if I actually made a mistake on my age or my username? There's no way for me to go back now because I've disabled this scrolling. So what we're going to do now is actually add in a back button to the top left hand corner so that users can scroll back if they want to. So let's do that now. So first of all, we'll just add in an overlay in the top left-hand corner of our Z stack. So let's add that in. So just above our on appear, we're going to say overlay, and then we want the alignment to be top leading because we want it to be in the top left-hand corner. And then within here, we want to create a button using an SF symbol as well. So we're going to say button, and then we're going to use the action label. So within our action, we actually want this to be our previous function that we added before that allows us to go back. And within our label here, we're going to just add in an SF symbol. Okay, cool. Now, right now, the button is actually quite tight to the left-hand side. So what we're going to do on our image is we're just going to add in some padding to just basically push that down. Okay, cool. So now our button looks great there. And as you can see, if I actually go back to the next screen and actually tap back, it actually takes me back to the previous screen. So I can go all the way back to the start. But we actually want to disable this button on the username screen because there's actually no screen to go back to. So what we're going to do now is add in a source of truth that allows us to toggle whether this button is visible depending on which screen you're on. So let's add in a new state property into this file called show previous button. So this is just a simple boolean that's going to be changed to true or false depending on what screen the user is on. And then rather than us actually checking the view via the on appear, instead of doing that, we're actually going to monitor the changes to the active screen within our app. Now we can do this by using the on change modifier, which will tell us when a property has changed. So just below our on disappear here, we're going to say on change of our manager.active, and then this will actually give us the new value here. So this new value is what our active has changed to. And then within this on change, what we're going to say is that if it's changed to the first screen, so if we're on this username screen, then we're going to set our source of truth for our button to false, or else we're going to show it to true because you're not on the screen anymore and you can go back. So let's just type this out now. So like I said before, we've just got this in here where we're saying if the new value is equal to the registration screen's first case, which is username, then we want the previous button to be false, or else we want to show the previous button. Now this is fine, but what we could do if we wanted to, we could actually just do this on a one-liner, but this just depends on, readability for you. So I'm just going to leave it like this just because it's quite a long if statement, but if you wanted to, you could use a ternary operator, or you could just directly do this comparison within this show previous button. After we've done this, we now need to actually handle showing our button if you're on the username screen or not. So we want to actually wrap our button in an if statement based on this show previous button here. Cool. And then finally, what we want to do now is actually animate the changes to our button so it's showing on and off the screen. So now what we want to do finally is actually just animate the actual button coming onto the screen using this animation modifier. So we're just going to add this onto the above the on appear. I'm just going to add in the animation. I'm going to say ease in and out. And then we're just going to say the value here should be based on the show previous button, like so. Cool. Now, when I was testing this out, sometimes this wouldn't work in the SwiftUI preview. So just to show you this, I'm actually going to run this again within the simulator. So we just go to our main app entry point, replace our main app view with our sign up view, and then run this on the simulator. So let's test this out now. So we hit next. You'll see that our button animates onto the screen, and we hit next again, it's still there. We hit back and we go all the way back to the user. You'll see that our button now disappears. So that's all working fine, but one thing I do want to do is actually add in some basic validation. So we're actually able to go past the username screen without actually entering in a username which isn't correct. So if I hit next, I shouldn't be able to actually go to this screen unless I filled out my username. So let's do some basic validation within this. Let's do some basic validation within this sign-up flow. So in order to do the validation, we need to actually capture the actual username that someone has typed in this text field. So we need some kind of model. So within our registration manager, let's create a new model to actually capture the input that someone has typed in during this registration flow. So I'm just going to do this now. So what we have here in our registration manager now is we now have a new struct called user, and this is a mutable struct. And the reason why we've made this mutable and not immutable is because we actually want to write to this struct whenever someone makes an update to either the text field, slider, or the text editor within our screen. So now what we want to do in our registration manager is we want to create an instance of our user so we can actually capture those values when someone's filling out the registration flow. So let's create an instance of this. So now we have this published property here called user, and we just create an instance of an empty user so we can just capture the values that someone enters in. And what we actually want to do is we now want to actually bind these properties, username, age, and bio, to each screen within our app. So let's just do this one by one and we'll just tackle each screen. So within our username screen, so we just go to our sign up view. And now I'm just going to disable this canvas for now. So within our sign up view, what we actually want to do is just pass in the username property into our username view. Now, the reason why I don't want to pass in the entire user object is because this username view only needs to bind to one property, which is a string. So it wouldn't make sense to pass the entire object when it doesn't actually need it. So let's just do this now. So in our username view, let's create a new binding. So this is the property that's going to bind to, and as you can see, I've only specified text because that's all this view really needs to care about. And we should get an error down here saying that we're not using that new parameter. So if I say text, and then now that we fixed our SwiftUI preview, we now need to actually bind to this text property. So on here, let's just create a binding to text. So whenever someone that types in a value, it'll update our user model, which is what we're going to do now. So let's actually add that in. And we're going to say here, add in the parameter. And then we're going to now use that user like so. So we're going to say $manager user dot username like so. Okay, cool. So now our username view is only binding to the username, which is all it really cares about. It doesn't care about the entire user. So we need to do the same thing for our age and our bio view. So let's go into our age view. Now this time our age view doesn't actually care about the username or the bio, it only cares about the age. Now when you're working with slider, it's actually not possible for you to actually bind it to an integer. So what we're going to need to do here is create a binding to a double. Cool. And then we need to do the same thing where we update our SwiftUI preview. We're just going to say 18. Now in our slider, what we do want to do is that when someone changes the value in our slider as a slider cross, we do want to actually show the age that someone has on the slider. So within this text here, rather than us having 1 hard coded to 1 year, instead we're going to have an integer of the age. So we need to cast it as an integer because with the double, what's going to happen is going to show it as like 18.0 or 22.0. So this will just show it as a whole value. And then within our slider value, we want to actually bind this to the age as well. So it writes back to the age property for our user. Cool. And as usual, in our sign up view, we'll get another error about how we're missing that parameter. So let's just add in this now for the user's age. Okay, cool. And then last but not least, we just need to do a similar thing to Bioview. So like I said before, Bioview only cares about the bio. So we just need to bind this to some kind of text. So let's just copy what we did for our username for this, and it's going to be a string this time. and then we'll update our preview. And then we'll just simply bind the text to our text editor. So rather than it being like that, we'll just bind it like so. And then we'll just use our bio property from our user within our sign up view. Okay, cool. So now we have all three of our views bound to our model in our source of truth, and they're only updating the properties that are relevant to them. So the next thing we want to do now is within our registration manager, we actually want to create a function to validate these views that we care about. So the only two views that we actually care about validating as of right now is our username view, because it's possible for this to be empty. Now we don't need to validate the age because this is always going to be set to 18 by default, so it's always going to have some kind of value. But we do want to validate the bio because it's possible for this to be empty as well. So in our registration manager, let's create two errors that could possibly happen with our registration flow for the empty name and the empty bio. So we go into our registration manager. We'll create an extension on it and create some new errors. So I'm just going to do this and then we'll break it down. Cool. So we'll create an extension on our registration manager, and we've just specified that we want to have a enum for an enum case called registration error, of which is using the type localized error, and we've added our two cases here for the empty username and the empty bio. Then we override the error description because this is what's going to be displayed in the alert that we add in a second. So depending on what type of error it is, we'll show the username is empty, or we will show that the bio is empty as well. So now that we've actually created this error for our registration process, we need to actually create two properties to handle an error occurring and also setting the error that has happened in the app at this moment in time. So let's just scroll up. And then below our published properties, we're going to add in two new properties and break it down. Cool. So this has error is what we're going to use to actually show our alert on the screen if an error has occurred. And then this error is what our alert is going to read from to actually grab the error description and show that within the screen to give the user some feedback. So now we've done that, we need two new functions to actually validate the username and the bio. So let's add those in now. So we have our first function here called validate username, and what this does is it checks to see if the username's property is empty. So if it is empty, then we do have an error, and if the username empty is here, then we set the error to the empty username, and we just do the exact same thing. We do a similar thing for validate bio, except this time we check if the bio is empty and also set the error if the bio is empty to empty bio. Cool. So we've got all of that in place. We actually need to actually call these two functions whenever someone actually hits the next button within our sign up flow. So let's go into our sign up view. And rather than us having these actions with the inline functions, instead, what we actually want to do is actually call the function to validate this screen. And if it is valid, so it doesn't have an error, we then want to actually go and call manager.next. So rather than us having this here, let's just delete the action, close that off, and we'll create the closure like so. And then within this closure, we'll do that validation. So we'll say manager.validate username. So first of all, validate the username, and if the username doesn't have an error, so if the manager has an error, then what we'll do is move to the next screen like so. And we actually want to do a similar thing for our bio view, except we don't want to call the manager.next on our bio view because this is the last screen. Instead, what we want to do is actually handle the registration part, which we'll get to later. So in here, all we'll just do for now is say manager.validate bio, and then rather than us calling the next function, we'll just leave it empty. So we'll say manager.hasError, and we'll just put a to-do here to handle registration, because we'll get into that in a second. Okay, cool. So what we want to do now is on our tab view, if there is an error, we actually want to show that on the screen. So what we're going to do is we're just going to close off these so we can just get a bit more space. And then at the end of our onChange, we're actually going to check to see if there is an error and present on the screen. So I'm going to use the alert modifier to show any errors. So it's going to say app.alert, and then the option that we want is the one where it's bound to is presenting and has actions. So the is presented here is going to be bound to the managers has error property. And then the error here is going to be manager.error. And then for our actions, because we don't want to actually perform anything, we're just going to leave this as an empty closure. But if you're someone who wants to have the actions to like maybe have a retry button or a link button to go off to the App Store or whatever, then you can add that within this closure here. And you can actually learn more about these type of errors in my video, alerts in SwiftUI as well. So let's actually test this out and see if we can see our errors on the screen. So if we just run this again. So what I'm going to do is just hit next, and you can see that we get our validation error on the screen telling us that our username is empty because we're calling the validate and we check to see if an error has occurred. If it hasn't occurred, then we go into the next screen. So because we did have an error, it didn't actually execute this next function. So now let's just fill out this text field, and if we hit next, you'll see it takes us to the next screen. And on our age, because we didn't add any validation at all, we could, if we wanted to, just go all the way straight to our bio if we are 18. But we're able, if we just scroll on our age here, you'll see that as I scroll through, the user's age actually changes like so. And if I go next, you'll see on the bio, if I hit register, I get my error saying the bio is empty. But if I fill it out, you'll see that I don't get an error when I hit register. But one thing I don't know if you realize that when I actually went on age, and if I go back, you'll see that it actually maintains the data that we actually entered during our sign up flow. So it doesn't actually clear the data because it's bound to our source of truth model. But it's a bit difficult to actually see the blue part of the slider because we're using the default blue for our view's background. So let's actually fix this, and we'll actually change the slider color when it's actually chose a value to white. So we go into our age view. On our slider, we'll just set the tint of this to be white. So let's just run this now. So we can't enter a username. Hit next. And you can see as we scroll through, you can now see that we can see the white that shows us how far we've actually, filled out the user's name like so. Cool. So now that we actually have that in place, we actually need to add this into the flow of our app. So we want the registration flow that we've just created here to be visible after the user has finished the onboarding flow. So in our session manager, if we just go into our session manager now, we want to add a new state within this enum called sign up. And then we want to actually make a change this time. So rather than showing our logged out screen after we complete the onboarding flow, instead we actually want to show the sign up. So this will actually set the current state to sign up. And because we've actually added a new case into our onboarding flow, in our main app view, we now need to show the sign up view when the current state gets changed to this case. So let's do that now. So we'll just add this in below our onboarding case. I'm just going to say case.signup, and then in here we're going to add in our registration post. We're going to add in our sign up view like so, and then this time for the transition, I am actually going to use an asymmetric one, and it's going to look a bit better. So for the insertion, we want the move to be trailing because we want it to like go off the screen from the right hand side when you insert it. And then we want the removal to be opacity like so. So let's actually just test this out and see what happens. So I'm actually just going to delete this off the simulator first. And then what we're going to need to do is on our main app entry point, we're going to need to add back in here our main app view rather than our sign up view, because we want that to be the main app view. And if we run this now, we should see our onboarding view, which is great. You hit continue. It now takes you to the sign up flow here, as you can see, which is good. And now if you hit next, nothing happens because you need to fill out a username. So you can continue. You can hit your age. You can go back to your username and fill out if you wanted to. You can hit next. If you enter in here bio, nothing actually happens just yet. If I make this empty, you'll see that again, error. Cool. So what we actually want to do now is that when someone taps on the register button, we actually want to call the view. We actually want to show a view to get the user to accept some terms and conditions. So what I'm going to do is actually create a new view called a terms agreement view. So let's do that now. So within this view, I'm just going to do a bit of typing and then we'll break it down. If I just run this on the canvas, so I'm just going to make this smaller so you can just see what I've just added in. So let's add in the canvas and then we'll just hit resume. So we just got a simple terms and conditions view here, and it's just simply a VStack with a title here. We've got a scroll view, which I'm just creating some dummy content with a loop, and we just got a button on the bottom here where someone can actually agree to the terms. And I've just added in a closure to communicate that this button has been tapped. So we want to actually show and present this whenever our entire registration is valid. So when someone taps on the register button here within our registration flow and everything is okay, that's when we want to show this terms view. So in our sign up view, let's create a new source of truth called show terms. So what this show terms is going to do is going to help us determine whether we should show that terms and conditions screen, and this is the source of truth for using the sheet modifier for presenting it on the screen. Now within our Bioview, we had this to do to handle registration. Within here, what we actually want to do is toggle the show terms source of truth. So let's take this out, and I'm just going to say show terms dot toggle, like so. Now that we've added that in, we actually want to add in a sheet modifier onto our tab view to actually show that new view that we just created. So let's do that now. So we just got our sheet modifier here, and it's just listening to the show terms source of truth as to whether it should be presented or not. And we just have our terms agreement view, which is going to be triggered whenever we tap on that button to handle actually calling a function to register a user. Now it's worth noting that within this tutorial, we're not actually going to register a user, we're just going to simulate with a fake API request. But what we want to do now is actually just test this out to see if this works. So in order to test this out, what we're going to do is actually delete the app again to run it fresh, because we want to run it like a first time user. So let's just delete the app from our simulator, and then we'll run it. And now we get given the onboarding view, which is fine. And we hit continue, takes us to the next screen here. So let's hit next. And then we'll hit next, and then we'll fill this out. And now if we hit register, you should now see that the terms and conditions view appears. So like I said before, when we hit agree terms, we do want to simulate someone actually registering within our application. But what I want to do is I want to actually add in a loading spinner to show the user that something is actually going on, like something is actually loading. So in order to do that, we're going to need to create another source of truth called is registering, which allows us to give the user some visual feedback with a progress view that something is happening. So this is registering is a new source of truth that we're going to use for handling showing a progress view on the screen when someone taps on this agree to terms button. So within our agree terms view, I'm just going to add in some logic to simulate someone registering. So when someone taps on this button, we're going to set its registering to true. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set a delay of 1.5 seconds from now to say that they're not registering anymore. So we're going to reset it back to its original state. So if it is registering, we actually want to add in a overlay onto the screen with the progress view, And we also want to disable the ability for someone to actually dismiss this terms and conditions, because we want the action to complete and then allow the user to interact with the app. Because if someone wants to dismiss these terms and conditions, they could be in a cycle where they just keep on registering, which is what we don't want. So let's just add this in and then we'll break it down. So we've added in our overlay here, and we're saying that if is registering is true, then we're going to add in a black background with a slight opacity, and we're going to add in a progress view with the tint of white. Then, depending on whether the state of the is registering is true or false, we then stop the user from being able to actually dismiss this terms and conditions view, which is why we use this modifier. And then all we do here is just animate these views entering and leaving the screen based on the is registering. So now that we've added in this, before we actually see the entire flow in action, we want to use the environment object to use our session manager to call the actual register function after this delay. So at the top of our signup view file here, let's just add in the environment object. And then if we scroll all the way down, on our signup view, we want to inject that environment object. Cool. And then in our closure here, we want to call a function called register. So let's go into our session manager, and then we'll create a new function underneath here called register. Now, in a real app, you'd actually call the API and actually register a user, but in this case, I'm just going to call the sign-in function to take you to the login screen, because we don't have an actual API in this tutorial. So let's go back, and then within here, after is registering is set to false, we'll then call that function, so session.register, like so. So now that we're using this environment object here, in our main app view, we actually need to make sure that, similar to what we did with our home view and our login view, we inject the session via the environment object like so. Now, one thing to note here is that we actually are doing a bit of repetition because we're having to inject the environment object. And to actually get around this, what we could do is we actually could use the state object at the root of our application. So let's actually take this out of here, and let's go into our root here, like so. And then we'll just simply inject the environment object like this. So now any of the child views within our main app view will now get access to the session manager via the environment object protocol. So we go into our main app view this time. We'll now add in the environment object protocol. And then on our SwiftUI preview, we'll inject that as well. And because we've now injected this via the root of our app, which is the main app entry point, we actually don't need to add these in explicitly anymore. All of these child views now have access to that session manager, so we don't need to ever be in a situation where we forget about injecting it within our switch case. Now, in order to see this in action, what we need to do is actually delete the app again and actually run it to see what goes on. So let's just do that now. So you can see we see our onboarding view. We get our continue. We have our validation in place, so we can continue with that. We can still go back and forward like we were before. In our bio, we hit register, we have our validation. If we put some text in here, we can hit register. We now see our terms and conditions view. If we hit agree to terms, we now have our spinner and we can't dismiss it. And then it dismisses the view. And then now we can sign out, go to our login screen, and we can log in again. If we actually stop the app from running and we run it again, you'll see that we just get our screen here, which is our login screen. So this is fine, like I said before. So this is another checkpoint. So if you're someone who just wants this flow and you're happy with this, then cool, this is fine. But what I do want to show is that something could go wrong here. So if I actually just delete this app from the simulator, now if I run this again, and I just go to the next screen, like so. How about if someone closes the app via the sign up flow, and we want them to actually, when they open up the app again, to start from here? Well, if I actually close this now, and I reopen it, you'll see that it actually just takes me directly to the login screen. What about if I wanted it to take me where I was a second ago? So in order to actually do that, what we need to do is actually add in a few more keys within our user defaults to check to see if the user has completed the sign-up flow. And if they haven't completed the sign-up flow, then we basically put them back into the sign-up flow journey. So let's do that now. So in our session manager, let's add in a new user default keys called has completed sign-up flow. So this is our key for checking in user defaults if someone has completed the sign up flow. Now the next thing that we want to do is that when someone actually hits the register button and completes the registration, we want to set this key to true. So let's do that now. So let's just copy this, and then after sign in, we'll set the key has completed sign up flow to true. So now this will set that someone has completed the sign up flow, and we've also got another key here for setting if someone has seen the onboarding. Now we need to actually update our configure function to now take into account our new key and check if the user has completed either one of these two flows. Now to make this easier for you to visualize, I'm actually going to write out some comments and explain the flows that we're going to be checking for. So let's do that now. So these are the flows that we're going to be checking for and what's going to happen if the condition is met. So the first one is if the user closes the app during the onboarding phase, so the first screens that you see, then we're going to resume the app from those onboarding screens. If the user closes the app during the sign up phase, then we're actually not going to resume the app from the onboarding screens. We're going to resume the app from the sign up screens. And then finally, if the user closes the app after viewing the onboarding and the sign up phase, then we're going to resume the app from this login screen that you can see here. So we need to actually tweak the code that we have here to take into account these new conditions. So the first condition we're going to actually check to see is if someone has completed the sign up flow. That means the last bit of the journey. Then we want to show the logged out screen, which is what you see here. So let's do that now. So I'm just going to delete this, and then we're going to create a new key to capture if someone has completed the sign up flow. So what we're saying here is that if someone has completed the sign up flow, then we want to set the current state to be logged out. So this will actually set it to be on this screen that you're seeing within the application now. Now, if someone hasn't completed the sign up flow, which is the last journey within our app, what we want to do here is we want to check to see if they have completed the onboarding flow. And if they have completed the onboarding flow, then we want to set it to be the sign up flow, or else we want it to always default to the onboarding flow, which is the first flow within the application. So let's do that now. So one thing that I've realized, if we actually just run this fresh, so if we go to the last screen and we just disable animations, well, if we not disable, if we slow down the animations, if we hit continue, you'll notice that there's like a white background, which doesn't really look that great when it slides to this view. So to fix that, what we're going to do is that on our sign up view, we're just going to add in the blue background, almost like a background behind this sign up view when it actually does the transition. So let's actually just delete it. Let's just actually just stop this from running. We'll turn slow animations off, so they are off, which is fine. We'll delete this. We'll run it again. And now, if we run this, if you hit continue, you'll see that you don't really get that white background no more. It looks a lot nicer with the fade. So in our username, if we just continue, hit next, next, we have our validation, which is all good, cool. Okay, sweet, agree to terms. So that's all good. And we have our nice fade animation and it looks all good now. So now what we want to do is want to test out that path. So if we just delete our app, and then if we run it this time, we're actually going to close it during the onboarding phase. So let's just go to the last screen here. And if we actually just close the app, and then reopen it, you'll see that it starts off again at our onboarding phase. So it kind of, brings us back to where we were last left off. If I hit continue, we're now in the sign up flow. So let's say if I was just completing the sign up phase and then I got to the bio bit and my phone dies and I close it, it closes the app. If I reopen up the test project now, you'll see that it actually takes me back to the sign up flow so I can continue where I'm at. Now, I've not actually done it where it caches the data in like something like core data, but if that's something that you want to do, you could do that where you grab it from core data or some kind of NS cache that's on disk. But now we continue, we hit next, continue, register, agree to terms. You'll see it takes us now to the app where we can, have our home content. If we sign out, it takes us back to the login screen. If I now close this app completely and kill it, and then open up the test project, it takes us back to the login screen as well. So we're not actually going to see our onboarding flow anymore. So now we've handled the state restoration for our app, opening up from where it was last closed, which looks great from. Cool. So that's everything in this video. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate if you left some feedback in the comment section below. Also as well, if you like this video, then give it a thumbs up, as well as subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to get updates for whenever I release a new video. That's everything from me. I'll catch you on a bit. Deuces.